I'm Mark Crumpton in New York. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Here's a check of First Word News. President Trump is working with U.S. governors for the immediate deployment of National Guard units to the border. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen made the announcement today. The president said yesterday he planned to use the military at the border until a wall is built. Mexico has started providing transit or humanitarian visas to people in a caravan of Central American migrants and says the procession of about 1,000 migrants is beginning to disperse. The Associated Press reports that some people, at the request of the U.S., that President Trump criticized the caravans over the weekend and Mexico for allowing it to proceed. Thousands marched through Memphis to honor the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the 50th anniversary of his death. They included Bernie Sanders and Andrew Young. Dr. King was killed at the Lorraine Motel on April 4th of 1968 at the age of 39. He traveled to Memphis to support a sanitation workers' strike. Jury selections once again underway for the Bill Cosby sex assault retrial. The process was suspended for several hours after his lawyers alleged prosecutors removed a black woman from consideration because of her race. Prosecutors pushed back, noting 2 blacks have already been seated as jurors. In New York, I'm Mark Crumpton. Bloomberg Technology is next.
And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg speaks to the press. The company now saying 87 million users were potentially impacted in its most recent data scandal and that they're learning from their mistakes. Plus, Amazon still under presidential fire. The president ramps up his war of words against America's biggest online retailer with a potential cloud contract with the Pentagon hanging in the balance. And Spotify stock loses some steam on its second day of trading in the public markets. We'll hear from an early investor in the streaming giant. But first to our lead. Facebook revealed 37 million more users may have had their data improperly accessed by Cambridge Analytica. That would bring the total number affected to potentially 87 million people. The news came before CEO Mark Zuckerberg spoke to reporters on a conference call. Zuckerberg said that it was clear Facebook didn't focus enough on preventing the data from being abused, but that he is confident that they are making progress in security. He also added that he's still the right person to be running Facebook despite this breach of trust. Take a listen.
I'm the first to admit that we didn't take a broad enough view of what our responsibilities were. But I also think it's important to keep in mind that there are billions of people who love the services that we're building because they're getting real value in being able to connect and build relationships on a day-to-day basis. And that's something that I'm really proud of our company for doing, and I know that we're going to keep on doing that.
There's a lot more to unpack from this call. I want to bring in Bloomberg Tech's reporter who covers Facebook, Sarah Fryer. We've also got Garrett DeVink with us as well. I was listening in to that call as well, Sarah, but there's a lot of things to talk about here. First of all, Facebook updating their privacy policies, not changing the privacy policies, but making them more clear. They say also making some changes to how they collect user data. And for the first time that I can remember in a very long time, Mark Zuckerberg taking 45 minutes of questions from reporters. What stood out most to you?
Well, I think what stood out is that Zuckerberg was even doing this. I think it's going to help prepare him, actually, for his congressional testimony next week, where he's certainly going to be grilled, under oath, which is a bigger deal. So this call gave you a sense, right? People are wondering if he's the right person for the job. People are wondering if he understands his grave responsibility here with Facebook user data. The thing he kept repeating over and over is that Facebook in the past did not take a broad enough look at its responsibility with regards to user data. He wanted to make the point that now they understand that it's not just about doing what users have signed up for, what's legal or anything like that, but what people actually expect and hope to get from the service in a way that makes it actually pleasant to use.
I do want to dive into, Cambridge Analytica specifically because, 87 million people, he said, was the maximum number of people that could have been affected. Cambridge Analytica has since come out saying it was closer to 30 million people. Originally, we've been reporting 50 million people.
Let's clear it all up because Facebook doesn't actually know. Facebook is making the 87 million people estimate based on the highest possible number that could have happened. Basically, Zuckerberg explained in the call today that they went and looked at the 270,000 people who downloaded this app from a researcher, this personality quiz app, figured out the most number of friends they possibly had that were unique at that time, and added those numbers up. That gets you 87 million. Facebook has not audited, they have not seen Cambridge Analytica systems, and they don't know really what's going on now. They're just saying this is the biggest possible number it could be.
He also said that they actually didn't know this number until, a couple of days ago, because there is still a lot of questions. What did Facebook know and when? Why has it been this drip, drip, drip of information? And in fact, Senator Ed Markey earlier today said there's more than a drip, drip, drip. This is a deluge, with reference to this Cambridge Analytica, the expansion of this Cambridge Analytica potential scandal. Garrett, of course, we're all wondering what Zuckerberg is going to be like when he's getting fired questions from lawmakers next week. What exactly are we expecting?
Well, I think, like Sarah said, it's a very good preview of what, he's going to face next week. It's a very different setting, though. I would imagine that Mark Zuckerberg hasn't been in that kind of situation where you have people kind of sitting at a table all surrounding you, looking down at you since maybe he was raising money, when he was a college student. So it'll be interesting to see his response. I mean, maybe he'll be wearing a suit. That's not something you see very often. But I think in terms of the actual information that comes out of it, I think it'll be similar today. It'll be, more of the sort of, we've looked at what we did. We're changing things. We're not the same company we are anymore, and sort of lighter on the actual, specific kind of information that sort of adds like a solid understanding of when they knew what and that kind of thing.
He also talked about, of course, upcoming elections, elections where they have done things differently just over the last year. They did take some action on some Russian accounts just in the last 24 hours, Sarah. And you asked a question about how can they really validate whether third-party apps are using the service's property, are not exploiting the data as they are not supposed to do. Take a listen to how he answered your question on the call.
A lot of the strategy has to just involve changing the economics of potential bad actors to make it not worth doing what they might do otherwise. So, I think you're right that we're not going to be able to go out and necessarily find every single bad use of data, but what we can do is make it a lot harder for folks to do that going forward, change the calculus on anyone who's considering doing something sketchy going forward. And I actually do think we will be able to uncover a large amount of bad activity of what exists.
Sarah, what do you make of his answer there?
If I were a member of Congress, I would say, Zuckerberg, do you mean to tell me that you can't give us a number on how many users have been affected by these kinds of data leaks? And he'd probably say, yeah, I can't. I mean, Facebook doesn't know once the data goes to a third party where it goes from there. Like I said before, they haven't audited this Cambridge Analytica situation. They're going to look into all the popular apps that use third-party information from people's friends in order to build their systems. But that was years ago. It could be anywhere by now.
Despite all this, Facebook shares up 3% after hours. Of course, they're down about 20% since this scandal broke. He was asked on the call, what about these delete Facebook campaigns? He said they hadn't seen any measurable impact from these particular campaigns, but did say, look, frankly, it's not good. We, of course, don't want people to be deleting Facebook or talking about deleting Facebook. Garrett, what do you make of, the level of contrition here, at least what we're hearing from him verbally?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the more of the same. I mean, one of the things that was interesting, he sort of mentioned, his initial reaction, a year and a half ago now to the election, and saying, oh, it's silly that fake news on Facebook had a material impact on the election. And he again brought that up and said, that was a big mistake I made. And I think it will, that the Russia conversation will be a big deal again next week. Congress wanted Mark Zuckerberg to go in the fall when they did the first round of hearings. They just sent their lawyers and privacy experts. This time they've actually got him in the room. So I think, we'll definitely get a few questions on Cambridge Analytica in this latest, situation. But you'll also see a lot of relitigation of all these sort of things that we've been talking about since the election about, whether or not, it was fair to both the Trump campaign and the Clinton campaign, whether they had different kind of access to different sort of tools on Facebook. And of course, the whole question of foreign interference in American elections, which is getting more and more relevant as the days tick closer to the 2018 midterms.
All right, Garrett DeVink, Sarah Fryer, thank you so much. Much more to cover in the coming days. Of course, Zuckerberg's testimony in Washington, and also tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 noon Pacific, I will be interviewing Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg live from Facebook headquarters in Menlo Park. A lot to ask her. Obviously, do not miss it. Meantime, Oracle CEO Safra Catz has criticized the bidding process for a huge Pentagon cloud computing contract where Oracle and Amazon are in competition. Catz explained to President Trump over a private dinner on Tuesday that it seemed designed for Amazon to win. This, according to people familiar with the matter. Joining us now in Washington, Bloomberg's Alex Wayne. So, Alex, what do we know about this dinner?
It was an interesting dinner. It was an invitation from Trump to Peter Thiel, the venture capitalist, who brought along Safra Catz as a guest. And she apparently returned to this subject several times over the dinner, this competition to win this Pentagon cloud computing contract. It's as long as a 10-year contract worth billions of dollars. It's big business. And Oracle is afraid that Amazon is in the pole position to win the contract. The way the Pentagon wants to do it is to just award the entire business to a single company. Amazon is the leading company in the world, really, on cloud computing. Their competitors are trying to get the Pentagon to split the business up among multiple companies, and they've got some members of Congress on their side who have also asked the Pentagon to do this. That's about the only way they can hope to probably defeat Amazon in this competition.
So the president was receptive, as we understand it, but could he really interfere, or are there any actual plans to interfere? It's obviously an interesting question, given the fire that Amazon has taken from the president over Twitter over the last few days.
We asked Sarah Huckabee Sanders about this at today's briefing at the White House. She said that the president does not intend to interfere in the contract, but he did hear out Catz during the dinner. And he told her that he wants the competition to be fair. One thing he could do to put his thumb on the scale slightly without looking like he's really tipping the contract against or away from Amazon is to tell Jim Mattis, the defense secretary, that he really thinks the business should be split up among multiple companies.
Fascinating. Obviously something we will continue to watch. Alex Wayne for Bloomberg in Washington. Thank you so much, Alex, for that update. Now, we have more details on the shooting at Google's YouTube headquarters on Tuesday. Police have identified the shooter as a video creator who was upset with the company for policies she claimed limited her audience. The suspect, Nasim Agdam, 39 years old, of San Diego, killed herself after wounding 3 others in the San Bruno, California campus. One victim remains in serious condition, while the other 2 were released from the hospital on Tuesday night. Since the shooting, we have heard from Google. CEO Sundar Pichai tweeted, "There are no words to describe the tragedy that occurred today. Susan Wojcicki and I are focused on supporting our employees and the YouTube community through this difficult time together. Thank you to the police and first responders for their efforts, and to all for messages of support." Other tech leaders spoke out as well. Apple CEO Tim Cook tweeting, "From everyone at Apple, we send our sympathy and support to the team at YouTube and Google, especially the victims and their families." Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey tweeted, "I can't imagine what our friends at YouTube are feeling and dealing with right now. We're here for you and your families and friends. We're also aware of the misinformation being spread on Twitter. We are tracking, learning, and taking action. We're working diligently on product solutions to help." We're going to be covering what we know about the shooting as well as the larger implications later this hour. Coming up, Spotify shares are now dipping after Tuesday's New York Stock Exchange debut. We talk to a key early investor in the music streaming company next. This is Bloomberg. Sony stands to reap almost $1 billion from its stake in Sweden's Spotify. The amount reflects the stock sale on Tuesday and the higher value of Sony's remaining stake after Spotify's listing. Sony operates the world's second largest record label and largest music publisher. Sticking with Spotify, shares are sliding just a day after the Swedish music streaming service went public in a direct listing on the New York Stock Exchange. The music streaming service kicked off trading as a publicly listed company with a share price just under $166. Spotify has more than 70 million subscribers. It's valued at $28.7 billion now. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde in London, who's standing by with an early investor. Caroline?
I am indeed. I'm very pleased to bring in PJ Parson. He is a partner at Northzone. Get this, one of the very first investors in Spotify. PJ, I've got to read out a stat to our viewers because phenomenal what you guys did. 600 times is what you netted your particular fund. You invested in Spotify when it was worth just $35 million. It's now worth a cool $25 billion. Have you sold? Are you holding on to some of your shares?
Yes, we're holding on to the majority of our remaining holdings here. We did sell some year ago, but we do really believe in the prospects of the company going forward, and we think that the company has a long way. Just as Daniel said the other day, that it's just in the second inning of a long game here.
And Daniel Ek, of course, one of the co-founders, who's himself now worth a couple of $1 billion. PJ, talk to me therefore about some of the analyst commentaries that are coming out at the moment. We've had still no sells out on the stock. There's mainly buys and holds, but some are concerned about the margins on the business. Some are worried about the competition and how that puts pressure on the pricing going forward for Spotify. How does it continue to be a step ahead of the competition?
Well, I think the company has a few competitive advantages that is very hard for the others to replicate. One is that it actually reaches the entire device ecosystem, not just the Apple products or within the US, which is the case with Amazon. I think also the business model is largely a function of that the entire music industry is now moving towards a very well orchestrated idea of creating a marketplace, largely the brainchild of Daniel and his team, and they can thereby disintermediate a significant part of the industry and thereby really significantly improve the margins.
Emily mentioned at the start that we have seen a little bit of a sell-off in the share price today, closed down about 2%. I'm looking at my Bloomberg, where I'm going to explain to you what I see. If you dive into GTV, you can look at how Spotify is trailing its peers. It rallied a little bit at the end of trade, but we were off by 2%. I mean, underperforming the market, underperforming Pandora, Sirius, for example, today. What about the direct listing and the volatility that we see in the shares? Do you feel this direct listing was the best way to go rather than an initial public offering, as might have been more usual?
Well, I think it's a bit early to really draw any firm conclusions about that. It's clear that the company made the decision to go to do a direct listing because there was very little point in having the cost of an underwriter to raise capital or to sell secondary shares, where there was actually no interest in neither raising capital nor selling secondaries in a more conventional manner. So I think the downside is obviously that you don't have the kind of investment banking methodology of propping up the share price a few days after the listing, and I think that was a part of the expectations with many, including us, that there would be and will probably be some volatility going forward until the market has fully understood the qualities of the company and maybe seen another quarterly report or so that they have their business in great order.
What about you going forward, PJ? Because this is, I understand it to be the single biggest ever return for European VC fund. You've got money to put to work, €1 billion more than. What are you going to invest in next?
Well, we do see a lot of interesting things going on in Europe and also here in the United States. I think the difference with the venture industry right now from, for instance, 20 years when I started was that we are addressing huge markets, fundamental market shifts like the entire multi-trillion-dollar financial institutions industry. It's ripe for creative disruption, and you see also that there is a lot of venture capital money going into that space. So we're quite excited about that. Then also, obviously, the ideas of disrupting the traditional way of selling stuff, typically through stores, and this is the direct consumer trend, I think, is here to stay and will build over time.
I've seen the fintech businesses that you're in, like Zopa, iZettle in Europe. What does this mean for the European ecosystem? Because we've got to remember, it listed in America, but Spotify is a European company.
Oh, yes. I think it is tremendously important, and there will be more strong European companies going public within the next 3 to 6 months, I know for a fact.
Which ones?
Well, I don't think I'm at liberty to say that. But anyway, I think Europe has come of age now and can deliver truly strong companies that impress also on the most discerning American investor.
PJ, it's always great to have you on. Thank you very much indeed, PJ Parson, of course, North Zone partner, talking about the next listings to come in the next 3 to 6 months, Emily.
Thank you so much.
Caroline Hyde for us in London. Thanks so much, Caroline. All right, coming up, while your next iPhone may look radically different, we will get the latest product scooped on future smartphones next. In the latest revolving door in technology, Apple has hired Google's top artificial intelligence executive to help the iPhone maker catch rivals in one of the most important fields in modern technology. John Giandrea will report to CEO Tim Cook. He's got a lot of work to do. Apple has lagged behind Amazon, Google, and Microsoft when it comes to AI. Meantime, the tech giant wants to make sure that future iPhones will stand out in a crowded market. In a Bloomberg scoop, we have learned the company is working on touchless gesture control and curved screens for next-generation devices. This, according to people with knowledge of the matter. The control feature would let iPhone users perform some tasks by moving their finger close to the screen without touching it. And a SpaceX capsule carrying food, experiments, and other items for NASA has arrived at the International Space Station after a 2-day journey. The Dragon capsule and its 6,000-pound shipment was captured by the space station's robot arm today. It'll remain attached to the space station for about a month, returning to Earth in May. Coming up, President Trump ramping up his critiques of Amazon, but will the administration take action against the tech giant? And would it make an impact? This is Bloomberg.
I'm Mark Crumpton in New York. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Here's a check of First Word News. The Trump administration reportedly now wants 85% North American content in car manufacturing. The reduction of the controversial key NAFTA demand is a potential olive branch on arguably the biggest sticking point as the U.S. pushes to reach a stopgap deal this month. The vice president of the Catalan parliament says he's confident German courts will be fair when hearing the case of jailed former Catalan leader Carles Puigdemont.
They will hear the lawyers and the evidence that will be provided, that this is a purely political prosecution, that's a politically motivated prosecution that has no legal basis. And for that reason, we are very hopeful that he will not be extradited.
France has flagged more than 78,000 people as security threats in a database that allows European police to share information on the continent's most dangerous residents. An analysis by the Associated Press shows that's more than all the other European countries put together. President Vladimir Putin says Moscow expects them to respect international law to end the ongoing diplomatic crisis. Putin met today with Iranian leader Hassan Rouhani and President Recep Erdogan in Turkey. He says he doesn't expect Britain to retract accusations that Russia ordered the poisoning of a former spy. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 5:30 p.m. here in New York, 7:30 Thursday morning in Sydney. My colleague Paul Allen has a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. It was an interesting day on Wall Street, wasn't it? Some early losses, then turned around to some modest gains. We had the Dow up 0.6%, the S&P up 1%, the Nasdaq also up 1%. Most of those indexes recovering from early losses on the hopes of a negotiated solution to this emerging trade war. If we take a look at how we're set up for the region here, ASX futures looking reasonably bright, up about 0.4%. Nikkei futures traded out of Chicago up just under 0.1%. We've seen the Aussie dollar strengthen as well to above 77 cents at US again. Let's take a quick look at commodities. Gold spiked before pulling back again. Oil little changed at around about $63 per barrel. Iron ore weaker, then again the whole metals complex kind of easing off on these trade concerns. Hong Kong, China, Taiwan all closed today. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Back to our top story. Facebook CEO speaking to reporters on a conference call earlier after revealing that 37 million more people may have had their data improperly accessed by a research firm tied to President Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, bringing the total number of affected users to 87 million, potentially. Take a listen to what he had to say about taking legal action against the political consulting firm Cambridge Analytica.
We've stood down temporarily to let the ICO do their investigation and their audit. And once that's done, we'll resume ours so we can get answers to the questions that you're asking and ultimately to make sure that none of the data persists or is being used improperly. And at that point, if it makes sense, we will take legal action if we need to do that to protect people's information.
In the meantime, Facebook stock has been climbing after hours, up just over 3% at this moment. Meantime, President Trump's criticisms of Amazon have come into focus this week. Speaking at the White House Tuesday, Trump said the post office must renegotiate its deal with the retailer to increase Amazon's shipping cost. And as we talked about earlier in the show, Trump's negative opinion of Amazon could threaten a multi-billion-dollar Pentagon cloud computing deal that Amazon is competing for. Shares of Amazon have been under pressure ever since the president began tweeting about the company, but the selling has slowed down after Bloomberg reported there are no active discussions about turning the power of the administration against the company. And several analysts reiterated their bullish calls on Amazon today. For more, I want to bring in Tom Forte, senior research analyst at DA Division. So, Tom, how much do you believe this is just smoke from the president, and how much do you believe there could potentially be fire?
Sure. So I definitely think that when you look at President Trump and his intent here, I think he has a strong feeling against Jeff Bezos to the extent that Jeff Bezos, the CEO and founder of Amazon, also owns the Washington Post. So I feel like a lot of these tweets are directed at Amazon, but the real target is the Washington Post. But for Amazon, the company, though, given that he is the president, I think you have to take these tweets seriously. And in the case of the Postal Service, I do think that Amazon is getting a bit of a sweetheart deal. So in that regard, I think the president's actually accurate.
One of the president's latest tweets, I'm right about Amazon costing the post office massive amounts of money for being their delivery boy. Amazon should pay these costs plus and not have them borne by the American taxpayer. Many billions of dollars. Post office leaders don't have a clue, or do they? You know, we've done the math at Bloomberg, and we've learned that the post office, in fact, does make money on their relationship with Amazon. Perhaps they should be making more money on their relationship with Amazon. That is up for debate. But how do you think this will actually affect Amazon in the near term?
Sure. So first and foremost, all the tweets from the president basically convince me that the second headquarters from Amazon will be in his backyard. If you look at the 20 finalists for the second headquarters, 3 are in either Washington, D.C. or a suburb of Washington, D.C. Basically, this process of picking a second headquarters is about influence. And where else could Amazon have more influence than being next door to Washington, D.C.? Why is that important? Having influence with the policymakers in Washington, D.C., including the president, I think is very important. Second, as far as implications for the Postal Service, it's possible they could pay a higher rate. I think really why I say sweetheart deal is that Amazon could not probably get the same economics with the FedEx, UPS, or any of the regional players like a LaserShip or an OnTrack. But the good news for Amazon is they're increasing their first-party logistics assets. They have air freight, they have trucking, and interestingly now, with give or take 460 Whole Foods locations and 10 bookstores, give or take, they now have a physical presence that they can also leverage to work on their logistics efforts. I'll give a quick example. When I go to my local Whole Foods now, I'm greeted with an Amazon locker. Why is that important? It's another place that I can pick up products I order on Amazon or return them. So while there's potential that disruption to Amazon from losing the Postal Service, perhaps in the most dramatic scenario, I think the impact would not be as significant as some may fear.
Postal Service aside, what about the bigger picture regulatory issues? You know, we were just speaking earlier about a huge Pentagon cloud computing contract that Amazon competitors believe seemed destined to win. Oracle CEO Safra Catz complained about this directly to the president. He was receptive, but there's no evidence that the White House would actually interfere here. But on a broader regulatory level, there is concern about just how big Amazon is becoming and how many industries they are getting their hands into. Is that something that the president could stand in the way of?
Sure. So 2 things. One, on antitrust, I would argue that most of what Amazon does increases competition, lowers the price to the consumer. Therefore, at this point in time, I don't think antitrust is a significant risk to Amazon. 2, on cloud computing. To that end, Amazon's strategy has been the early leader in the space and passing on lower costs to its customers. Netflix is a great example of that. So let's be, frank here. When was the last time anyone ever talked about Oracle and lowering prices? Never. So I think that, it's opportune for competitors of AWS to want to have the president's ear. But in this instance, when it comes to this potentially very large federal contract, if he wants what's in the best interest of the country, meaning the lowest cost provider to the federal government, it's likely AWS and Amazon.
All right, Tom Forte, D.A. Davidson. Of course, we're going to continue to follow and watch the president's Twitter account.
Thank you.
Coming up, keeping the internet safe from extremist content. We talk to the man helping to stop that content from ever being uploaded in the first place. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Authorities say they have found no connection between the woman who opened fire at YouTube headquarters yesterday and the 3 people that she shot. Police identified 39-year-old Nasim Agdam as a video creator who was upset with the company for policies she claimed limited her audience. For the very latest, I want to bring in Mark Bergen, who covers Google for Bloomberg. So the last 24 hours, we have been trying to get as much information as possible about what exactly happened here. Give us the latest on the motive behind this.
Yeah, the police say the most likely motive is that she was upset with YouTube's policies. And we've seen some from her videos that are now been taken down yesterday from her website, that she was a strong vegan rights activist. She posted a lot of videos about animal rights, some of them with grotesque images of animals being tortured. Her claim is something that's similar that we've been hearing from YouTube creators for the past year, that they've been seeing less and less ad inventory. Some of them go out and claim that YouTube is really hurting their livelihoods. That's certainly the claim she's made. Clearly, this is an extreme example, and it seems like this is a response that probably has driven by mental health issues as well. What
do we know about how Google and YouTube are responding to this, given that this woman got into a private patio at YouTube headquarters, which presumably there's badge access?
Right.
somebody with a gun shouldn't have been able to get inside.
Yeah, YouTube's been really quiet today. We don't know if they're changing their policies. It's likely that they will. We wrote this, my colleagues wrote a great story this morning about how, companies like YouTube, Google, Facebook, in Silicon Valley, they're sort of structured like college campuses, right? They're meant to have this really open and free environment. This may change that.
What about sort of the bigger story about the big policy changes that YouTube has been making and how they have been, we talk a lot about the obvious creators like Logan Paul and people who people recognize, but there are so many creators out there who do use YouTube's platform, and YouTube is making big decisions that are kind of dramatically impacting how creators are paid, how creators are, how they actually, the rules around what kind of content can be uploaded, and all of that.
Yeah, one of the key issues, I talked to Jonathan Albright, who's a research director at Columbia, at the Tao Center for Journalism, who studied this, and he said one of the issues, YouTube has made a series of policies, but they've all been rather reactive and not proactive, right? They're in kind of this tug of war between, they have advertisers and lawmakers and the general public that say you're not doing enough to moderate the content and some of the offensive content that's on their website. In response to that, they've limited the number of ads, and then you have creators saying that you're doing too much and you're taking over. And I think both parties are saying to YouTube for the past year, you're not communicating very well with us what these changes are.
Right, these are the kinds of videos that perhaps should never have been uploaded in the first place, right? Or should never have been allowed in the first place.
I mean, that's a debate.
And then they sort of are, changing their policy, which affects a lot.
Right. I mean, that's the debate that YouTube's had for years, and there are, the company, even before they were bought by Google, it was broadcast yourself, and they've been fairly dedicated to this idea that this revolutionary idea that anyone can go up and upload any video at any time. The metaphor that Susan Wojcicki and the leadership has been using is now we started out as a small town, and now we're this big city, and clearly they're this big unwieldy city where they haven't put enough rules and bumpers in place to prevent these kind of issues.
A massive city, in fact. All right, Mark Bergen, who covers Google and YouTube for us, thanks so much. I know you're going to continue to report on this story, and we will hear more from you. Now, reports that the YouTube shooter posted online rants about the company have some people asking if that should have raised a red flag. My next guest has made a career of tracking illicit content online, developing technology that helps identify things like child pornography and extremist videos. It's technology that can be used to help create truly socially responsible networks online, and is the focus of our latest installment in the Socially Responsible Network series. I want to bring in Dr. Haney Farid, a senior advisor to the Counter-Extremism Technology Project. His work with companies like CEP and Microsoft has led to the detection and prevention of the upload of millions of images of child pornography as well as extremist videos. So, Dr. Farid, first of all, I want to hear your reaction to this shooting at YouTube, for so many minutes, at the beginning of this situation, we didn't know what had happened, and now we have a fuller picture of the story. What's your take on this?
Yeah, so there's no doubt that there are complex issues when you deal with platforms of the size of Facebook and of YouTube. YouTube has hundreds of hours uploaded every minute. There are going to be complex issues. We've always known that, and we've always tried to contend with that. Our point has been that while there are gray areas, the types of videos that you were just talking about, there's also other areas that are unambiguous. So when we have videos of child pornography, when we have videos of beheading, when we have calls to violence, glorification of violence, those are clearly range from the illegal to clear and unambiguous violations of the terms of service. So my view of the situation is that the platforms have been, and your previous guest mentioned this, more reactive than proactive. And if you're going to have policies in place, which I think we all agree you have to have, we may disagree on what the policies are, but I think we would agree we should have policies. But let's argue about the policies. Let's argue about what we want on our social media platforms. But then we have to be transparent, we have to have due process, and we have to be consistent in the application of those rules. And that's something that the technology companies have not been very good at. And I think that they could do much better to avoid exactly the types of confusion and misunderstandings, and frankly being tugged in both directions.
You suggested the establishment of a cyber ethics commission to counter the lies of technology. Can you explain this as it relates to this discussion?
Sure. I think for the last 2 decades or so, we've seen somewhat of a Wild West in Silicon Valley, and it has led to an amazing growth of internet companies and social media and lots of wonderful things in our lives. But I think we will all agree over the last year and a half or so, we've seen the dark side of that, from the data privacy issues to the election tampering to the child pornography to the online extremism, and on and on and on. And so I think we have entered and continue to enter a very complex digital age. I don't think that we are thinking about these things as thoroughly and carefully as we have. And I think often, as again you said earlier, we are being reactive versus proactive. So in the same way that we had a bioethics committee established 20, 30 years ago to deal with the complexities of modern medicine and modern biology, I think we should bring some of the best minds together and start thinking about how we live in this very connected, very complex, very digital world. Because I think everything from the social media issues we're talking about to the self-driving cars, we've seen some very complex and troubling things over the last few weeks. I don't think we are prepared to think about them at a technological level, at a legal level, at a philosophical level, at a moral level, and an economic level. And I think we have to give more thought to that before we run headfirst in, create these enormous platforms that we don't know how to control, and then are trying to back our way out of that. I don't think that's the right way to do business.
Right. So on that note, I mean, some people might say YouTube created a monster. Facebook, it's too late. Like, can we put the genie back in the bottle at this point?
I think that's the critical and the right question to ask, and the simple answer is I don't know. We have been calling for years, and in some cases for decades, for the technology companies to think more critically about what they are doing. In many ways, I think you're right that these monsters are there. They are at a scale that are unprecedented, and it's not clear how we are going to back our way out of this. I think there are a few things that we can start doing. I think we can start thinking about regulation the way we do every other industry, but I think we have to tread very lightly there because bad regulation will make it even worse. I think the advertisers who fuel Silicon Valley, who are literally the fuel of the YouTubes and the Facebooks, need to think long and hard about whether they want to be on these platforms and what pressure they can bring. And then I think we as a public have to think about how we engage online. I think there is a spectacular amount of bad behavior online, and we as a public have to take responsibility for that. So I think across the boards, we have to be taking a hard look at where we are, because I think people have woken up here in 2018, and it's not a pretty landscape what we're seeing online. And I think if we want to return the internet to its original promise, I think we're going to have to make some hard decisions, and we're going to have to rethink some really fundamental things of how we do things on a day-to-day basis.
In the minutes and hours after the YouTube shooting yesterday, we saw fake news immediately, making its way into tweets, into social media posts, conspiracy theories being spun up about what exactly was going on there. It was extremely immediate. What is the real risk here? What is the real risk to our democracy, to our society, if this isn't contained?
Yeah, so first of all, this is not the first time. Every time there's been a tragedy like this, the first thing that happens is the fake news comes out. And so this is the shootings that happened in Florida. Every terror attack over the last 5 years, we are immediately inundated with rumors and innuendo and fake news. And in many ways, this is the responsibility of social media because it's baked into the system. The system is designed to engage you, to keep you on the platform as long as possible, and the sensational and the outrageous do that. And so I think the social media companies have a serious responsibility here to deal with how they are promoting this. We, of course, as the public, have a responsibility in doing that as well. But I think that if we can't agree on basic facts, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it is a threat to our democracy. You can't have democracy without agreeing on basic facts.
Dr. Haney Farid, thank you so much. Giving it to us straight. Senior advisor for the Counter-Extremism Project. Thank you so much for joining. Coming up, how did Lyft keep up the competition with Uber after the competitor raised billions of dollars from investors? We'll hear from Lyft co-founder and president, John Zimmer. This is Bloomberg. In a bid to compete with Uber, Lyft is testing a subscription service in the United States. The company has been testing out the plan in 29 cities over the last few weeks. Charging by the month instead of per ride aims to discourage customers from shopping Uber and Lyft for the best price and can build loyalty to a single service. We recently caught up with Lyft co-founder and president John Zimmer in our latest episode of Bloomberg Studio 1.0 and talked about the ride-hailing startup's competition with Uber. Take a listen.
Take it back maybe 3.5 years, 3.5, 4 years now. Uber raises $3 billion. We have what I believed was a lot of money, and is a lot of money, $100 million in the bank. So they had 30 times the amount of capital as us. And they're trying to destroy our business using that money. And that was, to be blunt, it was scary. Someone attacking the business, incentivizing drivers not to drive on our platform. But the team had such drive and such passion, and we were smart about the tactics we used that were asymmetrical, and we rose up. That was the time we had maybe even single-digit market share, and we raised the capital we needed. We built an incredible team, and by kind of coming up as the underdog, but with the vision, I'd say the leaders on vision, we've been able to build a team that's not just doing it for a monetary reason, and not just doing it to win, although we intend to win, and that's something that drives us. We're very competitive, but we also have a team that's values-based and mission-driven, and ultimately that's why we will win.
John Zimmer there, Lyft president and co-founder. You can catch our full conversation with Zimmer tonight on Bloomberg Studio 1.0. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. A reminder, we're live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays, 5 p.m. New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.